First of all, what is a lateral pelvic tilt? From a Postural Restoration Institute perspective, a lateral pelvic tilt is just a visible manifestation, almost a symptom, of this left AIC, right BC, right TMCC pattern, which is a way to describe right dominance that is built into every human being. When that right dominance becomes too dominant, that your movement gets thrown off, you have to compensate too much, and your breathing becomes more neck and back breathing rather than diaphragmatic breathing, you'll see people end up in a lateral pelvic tilt. The lateral pelvic tilt by itself does not really exist, because if you look at someone's body like mine, you'll see, when I had this lateral pelvic tilt, you'll see my shoulders were tilted, my cranium was tilted, my ears were tilted, my hips were tilted, obviously, my rib cage was tilted, my feet would have been tilted. Everything was tilted. I had a full body tilt. So you can't really just focus on the pelvis, because then you're missing the big picture. So in this left AIC, right BC, right TMCC pattern, you'll have the normal pattern has a pelvis over to the right side. When you're over on that right side, the right hip should be higher. I showed that in the last video. The rib cage and spine will be oriented to the right, and then the spine has to twist back to the left to stay straight. Most people will feel their weight on the outside of the right foot and more towards the heel, because their weight is over that right side, and thus the foot is in a more supinated position. Remember, that's the normal pattern. Sometimes there's deviations, but that's 80% of people, I would say. And then up at the neck is oriented to the right, and then the head has to twist back to the left to stay straight. That is the pattern. That is the underlying issue. When you have a visible lateral pelvic tilt like I do in this picture, that is the pattern on steroids. The first thing you have to keep in mind that this is not a strength issue. You can't outlift it. You can't lift heavier, work harder. You can't massage it out. You can't stretch it out, because it's a brain issue. It is a brain issue. With that lateral pelvic tilt, I also had SI joint issues, neck spasms. My ears started to ring when I was 13 years old. I had to give up pitching my freshman year in high school, and I was a freaking good pitcher because my shoulder felt like it was falling off. Shin splints, generalized back pain in high school, college, and then my adult life. I said the neck spasm, shoulder pain, just tons of tension all over the place, a lot of hip pain, everything. The plantar fasciitis for 4.5 years in both feet, if I didn't mention that, which was disabling. None of this was because of my muscles, and this is what I have to get across. This was a brain issue, a sensory issue, and I'm going to show you what that means right now. If you look at this picture, my little diagram here, what we have is sensory input, then the brain has to process that sensory input, and it produces then muscular output. Most people deal with these issues only at the muscular output area. They look at muscles. They're trying to stretch a muscle or massage a muscle or strengthen a muscle. They're forgetting about the things that make that muscle do what it's doing, which is the sensory input, and then the brain trying to process that sensory input. The problem is, if you're in a position like this, and even if you just have knee pain, back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, it doesn't matter. Somewhere, your sensory input and your processing of that sensory input is creating the wrong muscular output. You cannot just work on muscular output because you're missing the origin of it. In a normal functioning body, even if you are patterned and right dominant, what you're going to find is someone who's not in pain and doesn't have compensations going on and doesn't have pathology going on. What you're going to see is this. What we need is a right side of the body and the left side of the body with equal forces through the ground and through occlusal surfaces. Occlusion is how two surfaces touch. We need compressive forces through joints that tell your brain what that joint is doing. That's extremely important. But the only way that can happen is if you are getting compressive forces in a straight up and down way on both sides of the body. But we know, and so let's just look at the diagram. You have ground forces. So you have the ground pushing up underneath your feet, and then your feet pushing down underneath the ground. Well, in a left AIC, right BC, right TMCC pattern, we know that's happening more underneath the right foot than the left. So let me get that. So if you're looking at the right side of the diagram, when I'm over, and if you look, I'm going to now show the picture of me, you can see that my body is pushed down on the right side. I am not having normal occlusal contacts between both sides of the body. The left side has almost no contact whatsoever. This, again, what you're seeing with me is just the pattern on steroids. Even if you don't have my issues, this is what your brain is sensing all the time. I have way more weight on the outside of my right foot, on the right foot in general. So my brain is sensing the ground underneath the right side way more than the left side. Because remember, I'm standing straight. Does that look straight to you? No, it does not. Well, it's not. And obviously, you see that it's not straight. So from the ground, you're going to be sensing more ground underneath the right foot the majority of time because your body is turned to the right. Through the right hip, you have to have compressive forces through the hip joints. You're going to have it more on the right side. Also up through the teeth, most people will feel their right molars more than their left molars. Equal way, we need, for a body to remain balanced, we need occlusal forces, where those red lines are horizontal. Those forces need to be balanced by vertical forces that are compressive, straight up and down, and balanced between both sides. However, oh, and by the way, the inspiration for this diagram came from a dentist. So other people do know this stuff. What the dentist didn't know, though, was how we really exist because of right dominance. He was correct. Those occlusal surfaces, those contacts, and those compressive forces have to be equalized between sides. But he never realized that we are already right dominant. We are always going to be sensing the right side more. We don't have to work harder to sense the right side. We have to bias and work harder to sense the left side because of this. You'll see that the green circles where I got molars, I have diaphragms, I have hip joints, and I have ground feet, that ground feet interaction. All those circles are bigger on the right side because that's how our brain is perceiving it, because we're right dominant, because we have that bigger right diaphragm. Our brain processes right peripheral vision more than the left. So our brain is already paying attention to the right side of our world more than the left. This is the issue. This is normal, but when this becomes too asymmetrical, to the point that you now lose the left side, when you can no longer feel left molars, a lot of people can't feel their left molars. You cannot compress your left side unless you have left molar contact. They can't sense their left heel on the ground. Why? Because their body's turned to the right. All of these things, this is normal. It's never going to change. Don't forget about that. That is never going to change. The problem is when that becomes too asymmetrical, when it becomes too extreme, or you have other insults and injuries to the body, or you're constantly sitting at a desk all day and you're overusing your vision and you're losing periphery and you're sitting like this or like this and you're using your neck to breathe. And now that normal asymmetry becomes a problem. Look at my right canine, how displaced that is with my jaw shifted to the right. When you lose that left side to such a degree that you become so right dominant, all of that sensory input is gone. Think about the diagram again. That sensory input has been completely wiped out. And all I'm processing is that right canine. That right canine, I don't have the ground on either side. Remember, my jaw was already shifted into the wrong position, and I needed glasses, and I had no clue. I had no clue I was farsighted, and I stopped using my left eye at some point. My visual system was impaired. My mandibular system, your brain prioritizes tooth contact and jaw movements. It goes right back to the brainstem. It cares. It cares about that deeply. That was shot. I could not move my body to the left. I could not get my pelvis to turn to the left. I couldn't do any of that stuff. I had no sensory input and no sensory processing going on, and that lack of sensory processing, that faulty input and that faulty processing led to my lateral pelvic tilt, which was really just a visual representation of a very confused brain. And that's what's going on in almost everybody who may look like this. Well, it is going on if you look like this, but even if you don't have it to that degree, even if it's something more minor, you still have something like that going on. You have a confusion, you have a lack of proper sensory input, which is causing postural distortions and pain throughout the body. It could be knee, hip, lower back, neck, doesn't matter, shoulder, whatever. So what was the origin of my issues? How did I end up in that position? How did I end up with a jaw to the right? Well, you're going to see it right here. These are my impressions of my maxilla, of my palate, of the top part of my jaw. What you'll notice is the line on the left is longer than the line on the right. I have more space there's my left side, on the left side of my mouth than space on the right side. I was given palatal expansion when I was a teenager, which was actually appropriate because I had teeth going in random directions. I had a very small mouth. I needed palatal expansion. For some reason, my palate did not expand equally on both sides, and because of that, the right side did not expand as much. The right side of my jaw got trapped back, and my jaw was shifted to the right with the right side further back. It didn't get the chance to come forward enough. And at that point, for some reason, my orthodontist said, hey, I'll just fix the teeth in that position, and I was done. And literally, I was done. My body went downhill at a very rapid pace starting in the 9th grade. And that was the origin of it. And that's what I still have to get resolved if I want full resolution. My right side was not wide enough. So in this position, you see a normal curve. You see a neck that has its normal cervical lordosis. That is a normal curve. If you look at C1, C1 is behind C4. That's what you got to notice. C1 is behind C4. That means that is a normal curve. When you end up like I did, or if you have a right TMCC pattern, you may end up with a less of a curve, and that's what I'm going to show you. Okay, in this position, you're going to see, unfortunately it's facing the opposite direction, but you're going to see that C1 is in front of C4. That is a straight neck. That is a neck that's lost its curve. When that occurs, the head posteriorly rotates and the mandible moves backwards and essentially chokes you. So then you have to bring your head further forward. And as you do that, it pulls your rib cage up because these neck muscles become very, very overactive, mostly the SCMs, the sternocleidomastoids, and they pulls you into spinal extension. And now you're in the pattern. So you're in this extension pattern that postural restoration is trying to get you out of. In this position, you cannot rotate effectively. You cannot move side to side effectively. I would say the vast majority of people that I work with in person have at least a little bit of a right TMCC pattern. They can't rotate their neck to the left and they can't side bend their neck to the right. That's the vast majority. If that's the vast majority that I work with, that means the vast majority of people who are actually watching these videos are also in the same position. Doesn't mean that you've lost your curve completely. Remember, there's degrees of this. But this is why the neck is so important. Everything in PRI comes back to the neck and the jaw. If the jaw is free to move from side to side and can move forward, and the head can move back, which is what we need because you're living in the opposite position, and the neck can regain its normal curve, things go very well. When people are completely stuck, when that neck cannot get its curve back because of a structural deficit in the jaw itself, that's where the dentist is needed. Of course, there's no way to know unless you get tested by a Postural Restoration Institute trained physical therapist or a strength and conditioning individual who knows how to test for these things. You will not know. Now, if you could get some sort of imaging done by a chiropractor and it'll show whether your neck has a curve or not. If your neck has a curve, then you're going to do really well with the PRI program. If your neck is straight or has straightened, we have to figure out where that origin is. And that's when you need to work with somebody live because you're not going to figure out why is that neck straight. Is it simply because of dysfunctional breathing and normal patterning, this normal left AIC, right BC pattern? It could be. And then you get your pelvis and rib cage in a better position, your neck relaxes, and you get your curve back. That's what we always hope is the case. When I find people with necks that are not moving, I would say the majority of people, that is the situation. Once you get their pelvis and their rib cage in the right position through PRI techniques, their neck relaxes, they get the curve back, they can move, they can rotate, and they start to feel a lot better. Some people, like me, those PRI techniques will not work because of a structural impediment. There's something structural inside the cranium that is preventing the neck from getting its normal curve back. So what I did, to go from this position to my more muscular position, that was mostly, I think I did have glasses by that point, so that was a big part. But the lateral pelvic tilt went away relatively quickly just because I was taking a lot of PRI courses. I've taken 28 PRI courses. And so 10 years ago, I found PRI and I started doing course after course after course. I just took so many and I did techniques every day, even though I didn't know what I was doing. And I just kept doing them and doing them and doing them. And slowly I kind of started to rebalance my body, even in the absence. I'm not even sure how I did it. I think I got lucky a little bit. or I'm just really adaptable. I don't know. But I kind of got lucky. I just kept doing techniques. I would try everything. And some of those techniques actually made my body hurt. I would cramp up in my neck, I'd cramp up in my back, my TFL would cramp bad. I knew that something was wrong. Something was not going right, but it would hurt for, a day, and then it would relax again, and then I would try doing it again. So I just kept going because I'm crazy. Most of my pain and the pelvic tilt look went away without me really understanding the big picture, that it was being driven from up here. However, it didn't go away completely until I got my cranium to unlock. So if you look at these pictures of my old face versus my new face, and then also the pictures of my old head versus my newer head, you'll notice there's big changes. My face, my cranium is wider, my forehead is wider, and my neck is centered, and my head is sitting on top of my neck in a more neutral position. So now I have access to both sides of my body. But for me, that did take glasses, a special prescription, because remember, I was only using one eye, and I needed the splint. I needed the splint from my dentist. That's a flat plane splint. I made a video. I don't have it in right now, but I needed the splint to take care of everything. I'm going to have to get expansion. Otherwise, and then braces on top of that. Otherwise, I'm going to have to rely on the splint for the rest of my life, because the splint is what balances out my occlusal contacts. If I put my teeth together, I have no right side contact, none, unless I move my jaw to the right, and then I'll have right side contact. But that's bad, because then my jaw is moved to the right and it's not in a neutral state, which we don't want. That would just put me back into the torsion state. So the splint evens out my contacts, my occlusal contacts up here, so I can balance out my occlusal contacts in my hips and underneath my feet. So this gives me my ground and gives me my sense, so I can re-sense my left side. That's how it works. That's what the splint does. And of course, my vision, without that being corrected, I could never have gotten any of this to work. So most people will do very well because if a jaw is to the left, that's often not a big deal. Jaws to the right are a big deal. You may not, just because your jaw is shifted, and if it's visibly shifted to the left, doesn't mean you're going to need all the things that I needed. Jaws can move because they're connected to the rest of your muscles. So just doing PRI techniques with a qualified practitioner could reposition your jaw into a more centered position, and a lot of these things will go away. So if you want to know more about the splint, you can watch this video, because it's all about airway dentistry and why some people will need an airway dentist.